Good evening. It is good to see everybody this evening, and good to be together. It is always an important thing to be able to be together to worship. I don't know about everybody else, but in all of this quarantine, COVID, whatever we've gone through, I have come to appreciate being with my brothers and sisters in Christ and worship more than ever. And I appreciate that so much. Very thankful for the time to be together. And it's just to me, worship and being together with the Lord's people throughout my entire life has always been something that I look forward to and appreciated. But I've had a renewed appreciation for that, and I enjoy so much being with each other, and certainly it is important to do that, and a great blessing to be able to do that together. And certainly I'm glad for those that tune in with us online, but I'm especially thankful for those of you that are with us all our services throughout the week, and I appreciate that very much. Tonight I want us to look at the book of Ecclesiastes. We're going through the book of Proverbs, and really you might argue that Ecclesiastes is very much an extension of or an addendum to the book of Proverbs. It's very similar. It is another quote-unquote wisdom literature book in which it talks about life and different aspects of life. Not necessarily is it always true. In wisdom literature that it speaks about a facet of truth. It doesn't cover all truth. It's philosophy, you might say. It's different from the rest of the Bible. The wisdom literature is, and of course, the wisdom literature books are Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon. And those books are, just separate to themselves in that regard. David wrote the majority of the Psalms, not all of them, but Solomon wrote, or is attributed to Solomon, the majority of the Proverbs. We're going to see a couple exceptions of those in the last couple chapters were written by somebody else. Almost every scholar unilaterally ascribes the book of Ecclesiastes to Solomon. No one else really fits. It's about got to be him. And so he's the author of it. And then, of course, Song of Solomon is also naturally attributed to Solomon as well. And I thought it might be nice to go through the book of Ecclesiastes in one lesson. It's too depressing to go verse by verse to go all through it, I think. It's a book better to be done in a couple short bites than it is to go through the whole book. It is not generally the book you want to look at if you want to be picked up and renewed and energized, but I think it still can be, okay, if you look at it in the right avenue. The book of Ecclesiastes, written by Solomon, but Solomon is reflecting on life in this, and much of what Solomon did and experienced, he realized was a waste of time when he comes to the end of life. What a sad, depressing thing that is. We know about Solomon, don't we? That he was attributed to be the wisest man that ever lived. That was probably the wealthiest man that ever lived. Even if you count for inflation, he's undoubtedly will be the wealthiest man to ever be. And so, the superlatives said about Solomon are very unique. And so he had opportunity and blessings beyond our wildest imagination. If you want to look at some of those, look at 1 Kings 10 and you see the listing. The measurements of gold that he received annually were in the tons of gold, in the many, many tons of gold that he received every year in taxes. You look at that gold that he had and the wealth that he had, he was undoubtedly beyond anybody's imagination. One of the things that sticks out for me from that chapter is he has 10,000, not his military, but 10,000 of his own personal horses in his barn. I mean, just think about that. It's mind-blowing to have such a vast wealth. But that's what he had and who he was. So you got all this stuff. What is your position on this? We're going to read a good bit of Ecclesiastes. We're going to read some excerpts. There's 12 chapters. We're not going to read all of them. But we're going to read some excerpts from it to get a good flavor of the book. And we'll draw some conclusions along the way. Verse 1, chapter 1. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king of Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities. What a way to start out a book, isn't it? Everything's vain. All is vanity. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north. Around and around goes the wind. And on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. All things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. And there is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new? It is already in the ages before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be remembrance of later things, yet to be among those who come after. Don't you just feel all warm and fuzzy after reading that? No, not really, huh? Try to interject some levity. But you see that, you look at all that and you think, wow, all of this, it all happens. It rains, the water runs downhill, ends up in a stream. The stream goes to the river goes to the sea, and it all starts over again. He describes the water table and some other things. All this happens recurringly, and nothing ever changes. Verse 12, I, the preacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem, and I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. It is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. I have seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, it is all vanity and striving after the wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who are over Jerusalem before me. And my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceive that this also is but a striving after wind. Young people, if you want to put a verse on your wall in your college dorm, if you're going to do that, go away to college. Ecclesiastes 1:18. For in much wisdom there's much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. There's much weariness in study, as one translation says. There's much weariness in study. And there's true. You get tired in all that study. I've seen that before and in that verse in that regard. But, Solomon said, I sought to learn everything I could. And you know what I found out? It's all miserable. It is what did he call it? An unhappy business that God has given for us. He says it's all vanity and striving after the wind. You can't catch the wind, and what are you going to do with it if you catch it? You can't, it's going to change. It's going to move. You can't predict it. It is just that, the wind. And there's nothing you can do. In verse 15, the crooked cannot be made straight. You can't do anything with it. When something is permanently set as crooked, you can't do anything. You can't change that. What do you do? And he says, I tried to learn all these things, and all it did was bring me weariness. Let's go to chapter 2. Trust me, we're not going to read the whole book, but 1 and 2 I want to read good long sections of. I said to my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself, but behold, was vanity. I said of laughter, it is mad, and of pleasure, what use is it? I searched with my heart how to cheer my body with wine. My heart still guided me with wisdom, and how to lay hold of folly, so I might see what was good for the children of man to do under heaven during the few days of their life. I made great works. I built houses. I planted vineyards for myself. I made myself gardens and parks and planted them in all kinds of fruit trees. I made myself pools for which the water, the forest, the growing trees. I bought male and female slaves, and slaves were born in my house, and I had great possessions of herds and flocks, more than any who have been before me in Jerusalem. I gathered for myself silver and gold and treasure of kings and provinces. I got singers, men and women, many concubines, the delight of the sons of men. He bought everything and anything he possibly could. Verse 9, so I became great and surpassed all that were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me, and whatever my eyes desired I did not keep from them. You want a path to disaster? You follow the path of doing anything your eyes desire. He did that. He had the wealth and influence and power to get anything he wanted. I kept my heart from no pleasure. For my heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was my reward for my toil. Then I considered all that my hands had done, and the toil I had expended in doing it, and behold, all was vanity and striving after wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. He goes on to say that in verse 16, skipping down, for the wiser is the fool, no enduring remembrance, seeing that in the days to come all been long forgotten. How the wise dies just like the fool. After you're dead, that's it. You're dead just as well as the wise, if you're wise, if you're a fool. He said, verse 17, so I hated life, because of what was done under the sun was grievous to me, for all is vanity and striving after the wind. Verse 18, I hated all my toil, which I done under the sun. Verse 20, I turned about and gave my heart up to despair over all the toil of my labors. And so, this is all of these things are vanity and vexation of spirit. And what does he notice? That in all of this, it's all pointless. And so he notices these things. He has his wisdom. It's all vanity and striving after the wind. Then you come to chapter 3, and this is probably the most famous passage in this verse, about to everything there is a season. After that, those are of a certain generation. You want to sing Turn, Turn, Turn after that. The old song, was that the 60s or 70s? Anyway, that song, but that's where that comes from. To everything there is a season. And of course, I'm not going to read that whole text, but it's where it says a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to pluck, and on all of that. And of course, in all of that, he's talking about there's a time for things under the earth and all the things that are in the world. The latter part of that chapter in 3 I really like. It's probably my favorite part of the book other than the conclusion. And that is verses 9 through 13. I really like this little text. He says, what gain is the worker from all his toil? I have seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with, and has made everything beautiful in its time. Also he has put eternity into man's hearts, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. I perceive that there is nothing better for them to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Also that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is God's gift to man. What he's saying there is that God blesses the one that works with the fruit of his labors. You know, he's got all this stuff, but just the simple, good meal at the end of a long day's work is a blessing God gives us. To enjoy what you have. To enjoy the pleasure of the work that you've done. You don't have to do all that he did to enjoy it. You can just simply sit down and appreciate the good things in life that you've been able to have. The evening dinner with your family, the simple pleasures that you're able to have in life. You know, you may not have everything that Solomon has, but you have enough because God's blessed you with it. And that, to me, is, I believe, the heart of what Paul is talking about when he says he can do all things through Christ that strengthens him in Philippians 4. And that is that we must find contentment in whatever situation we're in. He even says that in the verses before that. And I believe that's what Solomon is saying here. Find contentment in what you're in. You may not eat in the finest restaurants in the world, in exotic places. But you know what? You probably have some good people to eat with. Your family, your friends. Enjoy and appreciate that. I have said to you before, I'd rather have a pack of hot dogs with my kids around a campfire than to sit in a 5-star restaurant on the other side of the globe by myself. You know, I'd much rather be with my family, with my close friends. I'd much rather share something that's maybe not the finest cuisine, although, you know, Boy Scouts would call those tube steaks, but, anyway, but hey, I would prefer that over the finest food in all the world because you're enjoying the people you're with. And it's a great blessing for us to be able to do that. And so I think that's an important thing. So he does acknowledge that there is joy, and God gives us joy in our toil if we realize this, that the pleasure in life is in those experiences with our family, in serving our Lord. You know, God gives us this joy in our heart, this blessing from our toil. If we would realize, and I said this in Bible class this morning, that the most important things in life are not things. If we realize that. If we realize that these children and the relationship you have with them and the time you have with them and our family and our friends, our parents, our loved ones, our neighbors, the people that we care about, the opportunities to be with them and to impact and to encourage and build up them as they build up us, that is the joy of life. Those are the most important things. The fruit of the Spirit that we talked about a few weeks ago, having love and joy and peace in your life, that is the most important thing to have, more so than having nice things. And Solomon's recognizing that here. It's better to sit down at the end of a long day and enjoy a meal with your family than to have all that stuff and not have time to do it. And that is a great blessing from God. And so, even though his priorities are way out of line, he realizes that God blesses us by allowing us the opportunity to be with our families. Let's look on. You see in the, as he goes from, in the end of chapter 3, he talks about that we go from dust to dust, and that at the end that we all return to the dust in verse 20, that, from the dust we come, to the dust we return. Then he talks in chapter 4 about all the things that happen under the sun, the wickedness, the evil that happens under the sun, that people are looking out for themselves, and he points out in the middle of this the benefits of having people that are close to you. In verses 9 through 12 of chapter 4, he points out that two are better than one, that if one falls down, the other one's there to help them up. It's a great example of a spouse, of a friend, of a neighbor, of someone to have in your life that can be there with you, and an important thing of that. And so he brings out that point. In chapter 5, he continues more about the vanity of chasing after things and all that goes with that, and the weariness that toil brings. And I'll spare you all those things. You can look at all that, and certainly you have all that comes with the working hard. But what do you have in the end? You chase after all these things. You might have more things, but they're not really yours, and they don't really stay with you. And at the end of the day, nobody has regrets on their deathbed about how much money they made. They have regrets about what they spent with their family, with the time they had. People have regrets about serving the Lord and all those things. But most people don't think about money on the day they pass away. In chapter 7, he gives a great contrast of wisdom and folly, and talks about, the heart of the wise versus the heart of the fool. And that the conclusion of it is way better to be wise, but it's such a terrible burden to bear if you're wise, because you're aware of what's going on. You're aware of the trouble. They say that ignorance is bliss, and it's kind of true. It's Solomon doesn't have the opportunity to be ignorant, and so he's got all this pain and this angst within him because of what he understands. And so he goes on with that. In chapter, skipping through, he continues more on that. You go to chapter 9, and he talks about how the death comes to all, and that it is something that comes upon all of us. He says in this that in verse 1 of chapter 9, but all this I laid to heart, examining it all, how the righteous and the wise and their deeds are in the hand of the Lord, whether it is love or hate, man does not know, both are from him. It is the same for all, since the same event happens to the righteous and the wicked, to the good and the evil, to the clean and the unclean, to him who sacrifices, to him who does not sacrifice. As the good one is, so is the sinner. And he who swears is the one who shuns an oath. This is an evil that is done under the sun, that the same event happens to us all. Also the hearts of the children of man are full of evil, and the madness in their hearts, while they live and after they go to the dead. But he who is joined with all the living has hope. For a living dog is better than a dead lion. For the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing, and they will have no more reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. Their love and their hate, their envy have all perished, and forever they have no more, and all that is done under the sun. Solomon says all are going to come to an end. All are going to die. And you know what? The way I would answer that, the way I would say that, from looking at it from a Christian perspective, is we've all got to be ready. Because all of us will someday, no matter what we do in this world, no matter how careful we are, no matter what we try, no matter how we live, we will all come to a final day. We try to lower risks in our lives, and we do that. We try to cut down on those risks, but the risk will never be zero. We will always, at some point, die of something, unless the Lord comes back before that time. Now, I'm not in any way, shape or form suggesting that we be haphazard. That we say, I'm going to die some way and take great risks. I'm not going to say that at all. I'm not going to suggest that to anyone. But there is never a zero risk. I mean, even if all you ever do is sit on your couch, you're likely to die from a lack of exercise. You cannot keep from having any risks. And so there is something you got to realize what is worth risking. And that's what you got to understand. Because all of us someday, somehow, will come to an end. And we've got to be ready for that and willing for that to take place. Because it's going to happen. And we need to make sure of that. We will end, our life will end, come to an end someday. In the next couple chapters, he continues to talk about wisdom and what wisdom brings, and how that even though wisdom's better, foolishness is never a good idea, and all of those things, so that you come away after 10 chapters of this, and you think, wow, what a depressing book. But then he begins a better tone as we come into chapter 11. A little bit, he talks about making investment. In verse 1 of chapter 11, he says, "Cast your bread upon the waters, for you'll find it after many days. Give a portion to 7 or even 8, for you know not what disaster may happen on the earth." He's talking about waiting and looking toward the future and investing in the future and those things. And so with a view toward having a future, he does that. But let's go to chapter 12. This is the chapter that is the conclusion of the book. And I would encourage you, if you've not read Ecclesiastes in a long time, or maybe even ever, there are other nuggets in the book that we're just not going to look at tonight. There's more things about death. There's more things about wisdom and foolishness and all of that. And there's some really neat gems in there that, like I say, if we were doing a more exhaustive study, we might find that are there. But yet, you will find that the book comes to a conclusion. After all of this, in chapter 12, verse 1, he says, "Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and years draw near, of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened, and the clouds return after the rain." Now, you've probably heard that verse before, and usually it is applied to the fact that young people need to remember God, and you need to raise up young people well so that they will not depart from the ways that they have been shown. Well, we know in wisdom literature that not everything is an absolute. That yes, sometimes young people do leave what they've been taught and do believe those things. But the foundation that you put in a young person's life of remembering the Creator will stick with them. I can't tell you how many times I've met somebody that is either an unfaithful member or they are out there on the fringes or whatever, but yet they had a good foundation as a young person. And they know about those values and they know about those things. And a lot of times, those people are easier to reach because they have that foundation. They're easier to bring back to the Lord because they once knew the truth and they once followed that, and they have an appreciation. Even though they're not following it at the time, they have an appreciation and usually an honor and a reverence to the things of God. And so you give them that foundation, and hopefully they won't depart from it. But if they do, they'll still have that foundation, and hopefully someone can reach out to them and reach them and bring them back so that they will come back to the Lord. And so you have that opportunity for that. Let's look a little later in the chapter. Read starting in verse 3 down through. We'll look at more of this chapter. He says, "In the day when the keepers of the house tremble, the strong men are bent, and the grinders cease, because they are few. And those who look through the windows are dimmed. The doors on the street are shut. When the sound of the grinding is low, one rises up from the sound of a bird, and all the daughters of song are brought low. They are afraid also of what is high, and terror is in the way. The almond tree blossoms, the grasshopper drags itself along, and desire fails, because man is growing to his eternal home, and the mourners go about the streets." He's describing the end of life. In particular, he's describing the end of the summer and how that things start winding down. The grasshopper begins to lose his energy because he's not going to live much longer. The day is ending at the end of the summer. The grinders are getting slow because the corn or the grain has already all been ground. It's done. The harvest is over, and the time is coming up to where those things, you'll put those things away for the season, and you're coming to the end, and the mourners are about to come in the streets. He's describing the end of life and what it's like. And here in verse 6, "Before the silver cord is snapped, and the golden bowl is broken, and the pitcher is shattered at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the cistern, and the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it." He lists quite a few euphemisms, if you will, of death. Of the silver cord being snapped, the golden bowl being broken, the pitcher being shattered at the fountain, the wheel broken at the cistern, the dust returning to the earth. And then he gets more pointed and tells exactly what he's talking about, and the spirit returns to God. And that's really what death is. The spirit leaves the body and goes to God. And what does he have to say about all that? "Vanity of vanity, says the preacher, all is vanity." But the book doesn't end there. Verse 9, "Besides being wise, the preacher also taught the people knowledge, weighing and studying and arranging many proverbs with great care." That's what we're looking in Proverbs. "The preacher sought to find words of delight, and uprightly he wrote words of truth. The words of the wise are like goads, and nails firmly fixed at the collected sayings. They are given by one shepherd. My son, beware of anything beyond these. Of making books, there is no end. Of much study, there is weariness of the flesh." Another good verse to put on the wall of a college dorm. And I've actually seen this one before in that used in that way. Of much study, there is weariness of the flesh. And you can think about that as you get to about midnight and you've got a final the next day. And here's how he concludes the book. "The end of the matter, all has been heard." When everything's finished, when everything's decided, when everything's been heard, fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. If you have a King James Bible, the word duty is in italics. It's and what that means, it's what in the King James, if you've got a word that is like that is in a different type like that, and what that means is that word is not in the original text. It's been added, okay? That's their way of telling you that, but it helps explain it. It's not, they're not adding to the Word of God, but what they're doing is they're putting that there to help you understand. The other translations add it as well. What it literally says is, "For this is the whole of man." The word duty is there to help us understand that this, in light of the context of Ecclesiastes and all that he's saying, he's talking about the works of man and what we do in this life. And so it's not a violation of anything like that to have the word there, but they put that in the different font to let you know that's been done. And you look at the front of your Bible, it'll tell you that kind of thing. But that word has been added there. The whole of man is what it says. Fearing God and keeping his commandments is the whole of man. That's all that we need to be about. It's not about planting vineyards and not about having great wealth. It's not about all of that stuff, but it's about fearing God and keeping his commandments. You think about all that he would have saved himself if he'd come to that conclusion earlier. But you know what it is? Solomon is the man that spent all his life chasing the wrong things and sits down with an old man and says, look what I've done. I have not feared God and kept his commandments the way that I should. That's what I should have focused on. He started out well when you look at his story, but he made a big detour in life. And more things we could talk about the way that he brought idolatry into Israel, by allowing his 700 wives to bring their idols to worship, and how that he did that. But I like to think, and I like to hope, that Solomon had a change of heart of a lot of those things at the end, and realized that fearing God and keeping his commandments was the most important thing of life. If you want a verse to summarize the whole Bible, I think it's going to be that one. It's going to be close, if not the best for that. That the whole duty, the whole thing of man is to fear God, to reverence, to respect, to honor God, and do what he says. You know, something I've put on as a status on Facebook. I did it a few months ago. Two most important things in life to know. One, there is a God and you're not him. And then attached to that, you really ought to do what he says, because there is a God, you're not him, and you should really do what he says. And it's very much a takeoff of this verse, that there is a God. Because of that, you need to fear him, you need to obey him, you need to do what he says. And yes, very, very true that we must do that, because that's what we're here for. Do you want to know what your purpose is in life? Young person, maybe you're wondering, what is my purpose in life? You might think about a career or whatever, and that's fine, and that's good, and who you're going to marry, and all those things are all good. But if you want to know the big, singular, most important thing as to why you came into existence, why you became a living, breathing human being, and why I became a living, breathing human being, and everybody else on this planet, we were put here to fear God and keep his commandments. That's why. Now, we get other choices as to what we do with a career and who we marry and all those kind of things. But the purpose of life for each and every one of us is we're here to fear God and keep his commandments. Because if we don't, there are consequences to that. And that's what that book talks about. Not the most warm and fuzzy of books, but the ending, the punchline at the end of that is worth it all. And so that's why I wanted to share it with you. Do everything you can to learn and follow the Lord in the days of your youth. And how young is young? Wherever you are, you're not going to get any younger. So what I'd say is follow God. Remember your Creator now. Remember now. At whatever point you're starting out at, you still have a chance to start. You still have a chance to grow. And in that, doing that, it's an important thing. Sorry, Sandy, if it puts a thought to your mind, but I say this about your husband. I loved Richard so much. The last Tuesday he taught Bible class here, I spent about a half hour going over the iPad, and just so he could know better how to present his Bible class lessons to the Tuesday morning class. That's learning to the very end. And that's gonna stay a precious memory with me of him desiring to learn how to do a better job presenting Bible lessons mere weeks before he passed from this life. That he was learning and he was growing with his boots on. And that to me is a precious memory that I'm going to hold of Richard. And that's what I want to say to all of us. We look at that verse, remember your Creator in the days of your youth, and we say, I'm too old for that. That ship passed. No, it's not. You can still learn. And that's going to be one of the treasured memories I'm going to hold from Richard because of that. Because he was still learning up until his mind wouldn't let him learn anymore, but he was still learning. And I appreciate that so much. Don't give up learning. And what a great thing that is. And so we must always fear God, keep His commandments, love Him always. That's what we're about. That's what we need to be about. And we must always do that. This evening, if you need to give your life to Christ, become a child of God, we want you to do that. If you need to return to Him, we want you to do that too. If you're watching us at home and you don't know what it needs to be to become a Christian, we've got it on the screen. If you want to contact us by email, by calling or whatever, you can do that. Our church email address is barrickvillechurch@gmail.com, and you can reach out to us that way. We'd love to hear from you. If you're on the other side of the globe and you don't know what you need to do to become a Christian, we'll see what we can do to help you, to teach you, to help you in that regard. Just be in contact with us. We'd be glad to communicate with you. But please remember, our job is to fear God and keep His commandments. And everything else is vanity of vanities, vexation of spirit, chasing after the wind, chasing after the sun. You know, let's keep our priorities what they need to be. And if your priorities are out of line, let us help you with that while together we stand and sing.